Welcome to Prose Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
I'll do my best if someone kind of goes, naturally. Yeah, that's a pretty good indication you want to say something.
Or a seizure.
Yes, yeah. Alrighty, I haven't hosted in a while. Got what to do. Welcome, everyone, to Prose Cons, podcast for emerging writers by emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. I am very excited this morning as we are hosting quite a special episode. It is finally our mailbag episode.
Yay.
Thank you. It does deserve a yay, a woo.
It's exciting. It's exciting. We've had this prepared for a while. We've been preparing this for a while.
Thank you so much to everyone who sent in questions. We have quite a few questions, so we're going to try and keep this punchy so you don't have a hour and a half podcast to listen to. The other thing that's really exciting is we have a full house of Precipice, which I don't think has happened in like over a year.
It's
been a while.
Because of all our funky time zones.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'll quickly go around. I'm Ali Burnham. I am a screenwriter. Though on the weekend, I got my hand slapped during my introductions that I need to say award-winning screenwriter. So I am an award-winning screenwriter. Yeah, I got heckled from the crowd. It was the nicest crowd heckle. May all your hecklers tell you to mention that you've won awards.
Very positive heckler.
It was, yeah. They literally were like award winning. It threw me off and was also lovely.
Sounds like something my mom would do. Like just to shout that.
It
Tell
wasn't
them
my
about
mum,
the
but...
nomination. Sorry.
May all our mums remind us that we've won awards. Yeah. I also do a lot of teaching around writing. I write in prose. I've written for comics. All that jazz. I will throw it over to Alex.
I have written a short story collection called Golden Hour and contributed to the new Mythic, which, by the way, I know we're going to mention this at the end, but because of the beginning of the episode, we have just put out an audiobook.
Woohoo!
Just saying, yes, it sounds amazing. And then recently I contributed a little bit of literary fiction to the Big Issues Fiction Edition, which is different to the regular Big Issue, I can assure you.
Thank you. And Paddy.
Hi, I'm Paddy. I'm a technical writer, editor, and sometime creative writing teacher.
Nice and punchy. That's how you know he's a good editor. Matan.
I'm also a writer. I mostly write horror and fantasy. Was award nominated for a Precipice story for the Aurealis Award. I teach grammar and English to high schoolers, which is sometimes fun and sometimes isn't. And I also do some editing, not for the high schoolers, but for other people.
Amazing. James.
Hello, I'm James Healy. I'm a writer of horror stories and science fiction stories and do some freelance editing.
And last but not least, Phoenix.
Hello, I'm Phoenix. I am not an award-winning, but award-nominated author in Australia. It still counts. Started in children's book writing. I'm a prorated editor on Fiverr, and I founded Bent Light Writing. We're an editing house that puts authenticity reading first. I'm giving a talk in San Diego in April. If you're there, come check it out. ACES Society of Editing.
Woo. Incredible.
Nice. Very nice.
Well, let's dive into this. So I've tried to order these questions. Some are anonymous, some come with names, and I'll throw them open to the group. A nice, easy question to get us all warmed up. Charlie, aka Zombine, asks, what genre do you find the most difficult to write for?
It's tricky having not written for every genre, but it would be romance. Because what do I know about romance? This isn't a helpful answer.
I got one.
Have you tried writing it, or is it just something that you avoid?
I think, James, you're on the right track. Is there any genre that maybe frightens you that you're like, look, I can see the mechanics from the outside and that's terrifying?
Yeah, I've tried, again, same as Paddy, I've shied away from romance and I've kind of shied away from tragedy as well, because I think there's something a bit too earnest about them. I love mystery, and I've tried writing mystery. And I think the thing about mystery is that there's such a hard line between it working and it not working. You kind of have to get everything right on your first go, or you don't have a mystery story. And I don't feel like you can say that the same about any other type of genre. But you can have a story and it functions, and maybe the horror isn't the best, but you still have a functional story. But the genre is so connected to the story and mystery that it's either right or it's not. So I've always found it there's such a high degree of everything you have to get right, and you really need to plan it out. And I'm just not that much of a planner to ever pull off mystery.
Mystery seems like watchmaking, like everything needs to work with everything else, or it's not going to tell the time.
Very low margin for error.
I gotta say, I think I don't think that's gonna be true for a lot of you guys, because some of you are legitimately hilarious. But to me, to purposely write something funny and still have a story is really hard. Like, if I write something funny, I feel like it just happened. Like, I didn't mean for it to be funny. Like, okay, I have a funny scene, but to write a whole book that is just humoristic and still has tension and a plot, I don't think I'll even try. But I think some of you, Alex, it comes a bit more easier to you guys, that part of writing.
Well, going off the back of that, I think probably hardboiled detective stuff would be really hard to write, because I feel like it's so tropey and it's been done so well already. I actually tried to do it a little bit for my first book, and it just like, even my dad read it and was like, I don't know about this. So ever since then,
have your mom read it.
Yeah, that's right. I should have gone to my mom.
Always show it to your mom, never to your dad, man. Always show it to the mom, not to the dad.
That's a good point.
That's basic stuff.
So yeah, I feel a little burnt by that. I think that would be tricky to do a whole thing of that for sure.
Can I have a second answer? I ruined my first answer with just saying dumb shit. Okay, it's actually historical fiction. Historical fiction seems really intimidating to me because of the need to actually have fact and substance. I don't have fact and substance. I just make up a bunch of shit.
But you would read a lot of history, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but I think I would always just feel like a phony because I mean, I enjoy it, but I don't know it.
Well, we have a resident historical fiction writer sitting right in front of us.
I know. And Ali's
what do you say to that?
Research. That it's just the actual research seems like all other books worth of. I think it'd be fun doing the research, but I don't know, it'd be a lot.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here feeling like an imposter, because you've all mentioned that like tragedy, romance, historical fiction would be very difficult. I'm sitting here nodding, being like, yeah, those would be difficult. Then I'm like, oh wait, I've had a crack at those with blind pluck alone. How did I survive historical fiction? I got obsessed with a very specific thing to the point where the research didn't feel like work. It's like I accidentally read all this stuff because I was obsessed, and then I had all this knowledge, and then I fell into the normal just story making part of it, which we all know and we all love. And when I had a gap in my knowledge, then I could fill that, like get the cork in and fill the gaps. So that was almost the two-step process for that one. What genre do I find most difficult to write for? It's such a good question, because I think I do have a knee-jerk reaction for when something frightens me. I do want to attempt it. I haven't had a true go at crime, I don't think, because even though I call myself a very plot-heavy writer, crime is so plot first. It's got to be so tight and it's got to work. So I kind of see, someone said clockwork before, and I see how perfectly crime needs to work, that I'm like, ooh, maybe one day, but at the moment, I probably won't go there for a little bit.
For me, crime doesn't attract me. It's not that I'm intimidated by it. It doesn't attract me because it's so, like, the plot feels so just, like, set that it's like, well, I'll get to that some other time. Like, it's like, well, it's waiting for me. But I'm saying that with a lot of naivety, because I have not attempted it. Who knows? I might try it and be like, oh, whoa, okay, never mind. High fantasy intimidates me, and historical fiction intimidates me. High fantasy because when I first started writing, I love to be really vague and like, it's like that's what I thought. I kind of equated ambiguity to kind of, and subtlety to cool and like well written. to the point where it became way too hard to follow. And that was kind of the first note that I kind of had to take on, was I was being too ambiguous. And high fantasy just feels like it's so direct. It's like, there are elves, there is magic. Like they're not trying to, they're really just like, here it is. It's not like the Dark Knight where it's like, oh, it's a superhero, but it's technology. It's like, here it is, it's magic, it's elves, it's all this stuff. So it felt too on the head, and I kind of shy away from it for that reason. But then when I read it, I'm like, that author just went for it, and that was a good story. But because of that, I was kind of intimidated.
Good answer.
All right, I'm going to keep this moving. This question's from Inba. Do you have any tips for taking dialogue to the next level?
Oh, I taught a class on this.
Oh.
So what's your expert answer, Paddy?
Listen to people in the real world without being like a creep about it, and don't record strangers' conversations. Get into the habit of listening to people when you're out and about, in the doctor's office, on public transport, at a cafe, and just listen to how they talk. I think a huge amount can be learned from that. And I got that advice from, I forget, but it was a few professional writers who have channels and stuff like that. And that is what they say. Learn from reality and try and internalize that. Real people speak real.
Yeah, that's good.
Two principles that I have is that I often try to write characters who are either wrong or are being deceptive when they're speaking. So that they're either not saying directly what they want, either because they have an agenda, or because they're not fully aware of what they have going on themselves. So your protagonist is often somebody who has a want that they think is what they need, and it's not necessarily because they still have something to figure out, but they're often surrounded by people who have their own wants and their own needs, and they're trying to work off their own agendas.
That's good.
It's good. I think it can sometimes hinder a story if it's not coming across that that's what's happening. You might have two characters that are not speaking earnestly. I recently wrote a story which starts off with two characters sitting in bed together, and I know that both of them are just telling the other one what they think men want to hear and what women want to hear. But because it's probably not coming across, it probably seemed like a very earnest scene, which it's not really intended to be.
No, I think you nailed that scene.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Wait, I haven't read it yet, so no spoilers.
That's good. It's real good. No spoilers, Elul. And something else I love to do is try to fill up the dialogue with as much slang and like in-world jargon that the characters have invented, without it becoming kind of too much and overloading the dialogue. But if you try to make it seem as much as these are people who have their own lives and their own work and their own kind of things and their own shorthand between each other, I think that can help if it's done the right way, if it's not too much.
I would say with dialogue, tip that I got from a video from Christos Solkis, who did the slap, is that you want to read it out loud. You want to hear how it sounds.
Yeah.
Dialogue, if you go through it, it can be a bit, you can go through and be like, oh, this sounds good. But then if you actually hear it read out loud, if you're like reading both parts, something will maybe jar and be like, oh, that doesn't really work. So that's probably worth doing. Just like writing the bit you need to do and then reading it back out and seeing if it clangs.
I like that. I don't want to add anything. I just want to reinforce what Paddy said about listening to real conversations, because so often dialogue is hijacked by the plot. Like, we really want the conversation to serve the plot, to say what the plot needs the character to say, and we kind of it stops it from sounding like two people really talking. A really good example is in Pulp Fiction, which is not a book, it is a movie. But now that example actually comes under scrutiny sometimes, but it starts with two dudes just talking about burgers in a car. Now that's the extreme, okay? You don't have to have two people in a tavern talking about how to make mead, but these kind of conversations can be a nice touch in a story.
I think it starts with the cafe scene with the guy and the girl, but the same thing.
Oh, sorry.
But that's all Quentin Tarantino's dialogue. It's just people having meandering conversations and then sudden bloody violence immediately afterward.
Yeah.
To me, a party starts when Sam Jackson walks in. So
yeah, that's fair. I'd like to create a counterpoint to that. The dialogue in Tenet, and I know some people are fans of this, but the dialogue in Tenet serves only to the plot, and I hate it. I hate it so much.
So it's not a counterpoint. It's an extra point.
It's the reverse of
it's just a normal point.
Wait, Alex, you hate Tenet? No.
Yeah, it's the reverse of what Matan, you said. It's don't necessarily have it to serve the plot the whole time. this only serves the plot and it's to its detriment. That's what I'm saying.
It's interesting because the reason Tarantino stands out and Shane Black stands out as unusual screenwriters who have that dialogue that breathes and sounds like just people shooting the shit is because the traditional rule of thumb in screenplay is the minutes are so tight that you can't waste budget on two people just fucking about. Usually every line of dialogue is honed to the point and either needs to be moving the plot forward or demonstrating character or ideally doing both. So I think my natural dialogue style is not real. It's not how real people talk. What I write is, I always think of it as quite stylized because it is being honed to a purpose. And if you can hone it to that purpose and then in your final pass, make it sound as natural as possible, like something someone would say, it's almost like I need to do my first pass of all the text where everyone is speaking the subtext, just so I can see the beats move down the page. And then my second pass is, okay, now they try and cover it up. Gotta now hide the subtext, which is kind of what you're saying, James. That's exactly how I write. That I imagine none of my characters ever like to say what they want or what they feel. It just as a rule of thumb, no one in this universe likes to say what they want. Therefore, if someone wants to get information out of someone else, it has to, if it's a two-hander scene, two characters, the other one has to work to pry that information out of them. Even if it's simple as, how are you doing today? You're a bit down in the dumps. The other character's going to be like, no, I'm fine. It immediately becomes a conflict in the moment that the other one has to work to get the actual truth out of them. So just by having that rule of thumb, I try to, therefore every conversation becomes a moment of conflict. It becomes a moment of action, just to make it mean something. Because as much as I enjoy those shoot the shit moments when the entire movie's like that, I'm just like, that's when I get a little bit irritated. I don't know, just because I've always leaned towards the slightly hyper-real stylized dialogue as that's good dialogue.
For me, I know that when I'm reading back through my dialogue, and it's like it's a particular feeling when I know I'm in, like, I feel like I'm really in the character that I'm writing for in the moment versus I'm just trying, like, I just want to get the words on the page so I have the scene out and I'll come back to it later. It's like a very distinct feeling. And I know there are times when I read back through my dialogue and I'm like, it doesn't feel like, I don't feel like I was plugged into this character. Rather, I feel like I was recycling words and lines and vibes that I kind of picked up from other characters that I thought were cool, or even vaguely, like, you know, lines that might be sentiments that are kind of repeated and recycled over and over again. And it's like I can see myself defaulting a little bit. And when I see that, then I kind of, that's my own personal red flag of like, all right, shake it out. Like, let's see, like, really like feel into this character. Where's their heart at? What's going on here? Also contractions, use more contractions. That usually when people don't use contractions, it's like, I don't know, they feel like bricks in a piece of dialogue.
You cannot stand them.
I cannot stand them. They're not always the right way to go, but I just, easy way. Easy
especially
way.
in fantasy, people are like, oh, I need this to sound different. I'm not going to use contractions. And you're like, if you have that instinct, don't. Just
everyone in fantasy speaks like they're in Victorian England, surely.
But not using contractions is not the way.
I'm slightly squirming here because I feel personally attacked. But no, I do understand this. I do. I'm working on it. But yeah.
All right. This next question is from Tom. People have so many different approaches and method for writing, and yet collaboration is universally considered beneficial. What does the podcast crew personally get out of collab, and do they ever struggle to collaborate? It's a good question.
It's funny if one of us say we never struggle and someone says, oh, we struggle all the time.
See, I can have a crack at this one. So in TV, especially in TV, it is by default a collab environment. Writers' rooms have a fairly... I actually really love the military structure that is kind of put over film in general, in that rules are very well clearly defined, because that's the only way you can govern, like, you know, bullshit that can happen in the creative process. So in a writer's room, there is a head writer. If the producer is a showrunner, they're also in the room. But if the producer's not a showrunner, they're not in the room, because writers all clam up when the producer's around and then they don't have opinions and they don't say things. So a rule of thumb, we boot the producers out if they're not a creative producer. It's a head writer. And then
who decides, who qualifies a producer as a showrunner? Is that like a
well,
clause
usually
in
the
contract?
producer. But at the very start, their role has to be clearly defined. If they are creative producer, they are therefore a showrunner. Therefore, they will be writing one of the scripts and they will be across all of the scripts. If they're a producer who would rather just give notes, they're not in the room. It'll be
That's
a head writer running the room. In Australia, it's typical to have about 3, maybe 4 if you're lucky. In America, you can have a room up to 10 people.
Wow.
Far out.
What?
That's why
What?
it needs to kind of be a little bit this military structure. So that's the only way you can herd cats.
I think everyone in the US is either an actor or a screenwriter, so
that's how you keep people employed. That's how you keep the economy going.
Sometimes both.
Yeah.
So they've got collab down to a really fine art, I guess is what I'm saying. And I actually really love the writing room style. Days will be delineated between, today we're just talking big picture structure, and then other days will be, maybe we're just brainstorming the world and talking character. Other days will be like, we're talking episode 1, let's beat this episode out. And then once episodes are beated out, then they're given away to whoever's been nominated to write that episode. They go away and do the writing. So kind of all the discussion of structure all the way down to almost on a scene by scene basis is honed in by the full group. Then that's...
Wait.
Yeah.
Ali, I got to ask you 2 questions.
Yes.
First one's real quick. What's the most people you've ever shared a writer's room with?
Me personally, I think I've been in a room of 6 in Australia. The reason it got that big is because we had... So then the note takers in there, and then plus we had an extra consult. It was funny, we were writing about broom, so we had a person in who's like, they are the expert on broom. So if we have a question about the location, we just throw it to the person in
That's
the room.
very useful.
Even then, their role isn't so well defined. Like, they know, like, they're just going to sit there and kind of be quiet unless it's about broom.
Right.
Because you don't want it to get messy with... Like, that's a really good way to not get invited to the next writer's room if you start speaking, if it's not your specific, it's not your role in the room to do that.
It's fair enough. Yeah. So my second question is this. When you are part of such a collective, whether it be 6 or 5 or even 3, how much impact do you feel like you have on the final thing? Do you feel like it's...
Ooh,
yeah, how do you feel?
Yeah, like, you get... If you're a writer in the room... like, you'll be credited as a writer on the show. The screenplay credit goes to the person who wrote it. So if you're literally tippy-tappy at the keyboard, you've created the screenplay, and then you have the writer's credit if you're a writer in the room.
I didn't know that.
If you're doing like a week of collab, like, getting locked in a room of writers is one of the best experiences ever. And by the end of it, it's really hard to track whose idea is who. And ideally, it's a really healthy writer's room if no one is tracking whose idea is who. Because by the end of it, it's just this snowball thing that's happened. Everyone's agreed upon it. We've all been panel beating it from different angles. So we've all honed out things maybe people didn't like about it until we all like it. So I feel like the healthiest writers' rooms are the ones, where you can't really track how much you added. And the best supportive rooms I'm in are also the ones where, if you come back to a point made earlier, a good head writer goes, oh, like Ali said earlier, we can come back to this. Like, a good head writer lifts people up, reminds people who said what. So it's not...
That's really cool.
Yeah, you're not doing that thing where, like, oh, let's grab this idea and run with it. It's always kind of like, oh, you were talking about that earlier. That was good. And yeah, I've seen masters work that way. It's a really subtle social exercise, but it actually makes, like, the room feel really good and no one feel trod
I feel
on.
like I want you to describe a bad head writer, but I think that's not something we want to go into. I'm just curious, but okay.
Well, I did have an experience where a head writer they clearly had it in their head, and they just wanted to get it done. We were running out of hours. So they just grabbed some palm cards, jumped on the floor, and beat it out the episode. Like they just finished it because the collab was working too slow for them. And like, I get that because sometimes I feel frustrated and I'm like, look, I've just got it in my head. I can just do it. That's a great writer writing. That's not a good head writer getting the most out of their room that their production company has paid for. So maybe that's an example of a bad head writer who just gets frustrated and just does it themselves. But I also understand that, you know, the time pressure, they just wanted it done. So that's my example of how collab can work really well in screenwriting, and that's where I'm from. But because of that, the idea of collaborating on prose always scared the crap out of me because I'm like, how's that meant to work? There's so many words, the file is bigger. How do you do that? So Alex and I, for me, I'm seeing this as a really cool experiment of this is my first collab on prose writing and how we can get it working. And we're literally doing it as back and forth. And that's working really well for me. And then I imagine once we have our first draft, then we'll get our mitts on each other's sections. But for now, we're literally writing letters to each other. And that's a lot of fun, how we can, it's a very clear delineation of getting the actual words out.
Yeah, and the way it's written is that we're both writing from a character, and like they're different characters, so there's no
that's so cool.
The voices like overlapping or anything. It's like Ali's writing from one person, I'm writing from another person. That is very fun.
That's good.
Fun to do.
What genre?
It's okay. It's sort of historical fiction and sort of sci-fi. So I'll
it's a sci-fi comedy.
Oh, so it's present day.
Yeah, it's pretty wackadoodle, to be honest. It's really fun. Yeah, but
what if Caesar had a gun?
Yeah, pretty much, or a Gatling gun even. That's
Sorry, I'll stop.
That's one example of collab I've done. I did another one just very recently with a friend of mine, a play, and this was completely different because it was like it's a one-woman show, and it's about like a single mother who like is just waiting in a waiting room and kind of going slowly insane. Not a single mother, a married person, but. That was really interesting because she came in and she wrote all the stuff out because she's a planner. And then it got to this point where she was like, what do we do now? And I'm like, well, now we write it. Because I'm really good at doing that bit. I'm not so good at planning.
Yeah.
So what we did was I just sort of wrote it down and I would read the notes out and then she would say like, oh, well, maybe this happens. And I'd say, okay, we'll do that. And then eventually I'd pass it over to her and she'd take on the writer role and I'd be more like, oh, well, you know, this and this. So yeah, that's been really fun as well. And we got a good solid chunk of it done that last time. And we're doing it again on Sunday. So yeah.
So I work on Fiverr, but I'm also partnered with a couple editing houses in Australia or publishers in Australia. So I'm doing one project right now for one of the publishers. And it was actually today that I was working on it. I had this really amazing feeling of satisfaction because normally when I'm working with someone, I play the role of developmental editor and then might also continue with them to do their copy and line editing as well. Maybe even a proofread, whatever. I'm just doing the proofread on this one. And I know that the lead of the publisher has like developmental editors that they use. So I had this really cool sensation of feeling like I'm the proofreader. She passed it off to me because it had already gone through their developmental editors. Like it had gone through a team before it got to me. And it was this cool feeling of like, I don't have to worry about developmental. Like I'll still call out little whatever things if I find them. But for the most part, it's like, that was the developmental editor's job. And I can focus on this because they're supporting from that angle. And I don't have to worry as much about combing plot lines through. So it was this really cool feeling of being able to lean back on someone, which I really appreciated in that sense. I don't even know if that answered the question, but that was a cool collaboration moment.
It did.
Sure it did.
It did.
It's good when people are, they know what their part in the project is, and everyone feels like, okay, well, I'm doing this, and I know you're doing this, and I trust you because I trust your skills, and I know how it's handled.
Yes, that.
Yeah, it was a good answer.
Yeah, thanks, Paddy.
Good support, guys.
Welcome.
Good collab.
Yeah, that was a good, solid collab right there.
Next question is from Inbar again. Thank you, Inbar.
Thank you.
How can you tell when a criticism or notes are useful?
We have a whole episode on this, actually. We do.
Ooh.
It's a really good question.
Unpacking. It is a great question.
Ooh.
I think the first thing is make sure the criticism is coming from someone whose taste you share, right? So they don't have to be a writer, but you guys have to be into similar things. If you take a historical fiction manuscript and give it to a room full of like sci-fi geeks, maybe that's not going to go so well. They're going to be like, "Where's all the? Like, I want to know how the pain works. Like, how does like what's the fuel source? You know, like it's just." Maybe
Sorry,
not
I'm
going to be a
dying.
great match. You know what I mean? It's not that they're wrong. It's just a different perspective. So definitely, make sure you're going from someone who is coming from your kind of view of what that story is meant to be about.
I agree with you, Alex. Although I think it's an interesting question because, like, how do you know if feedback is good or not? Well, eventually you get a sense for it, I think, over time. And again, we've said this many times. If you're not in a writing collective, try and join one. Try and join a bunch of people and get used to receiving feedback and giving feedback. And over time, I think you'll get a nose for what good feedback feels like. But if you don't have the same taste as someone, I mean, yeah, what you said is true, Alex. I think you can still take someone whose taste you respect, and then you just get a sense for what to ignore and what to keep out of that. Like if you get someone who they're a really big sci-fi person, they're getting to the nuts and bolts, maybe you know to ignore that. Because, okay, like I respect your taste, but yeah, like that's not necessary here. But then if you respect their taste, they might have some character notes that are really good or dialogue notes. Because I think there are some things that cross across genres, across tastes. You know, there is something like universal to good writing, universal-ish.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Actually, yeah.
That's fair.
I don't have
Absolutely,
a
yeah.
very intellectual answer to this question. I only have an emotive answer, which may not translate well. But when I receive a lot of notes on a project, I'm thinking of my screenplays, for example. My process of going through them, because if I get a whole heap of notes, I will write them all out in my own words, because I only like to work from notes written in my own words. Because I still have quite an emotive response to if a producer, because producers are fun, they can be quite blunt, and you need them to be blunt. But if they say something and I have they're just being, devil's advocate, or they're being stupid. So I need to take my emotive response out of the process. So I need to write the notes in my own words. So when I'm actually working and tinkering, I'm not having an emotive response. But this process of translating it and writing it all out again, if something makes me a little bit frustrated, I have to identify that the frustration is, because I've been called on something that I know they're right and I'm going to have to change. So I identify that frustration, translate it across. But then there's another kind of, couple of seconds of blinding anger, seeing red. And then I'm like, wait, no, I'm actually angry because that's a really dumb note. So I have to ask myself, what's triggering the emotion? Is it a frustration that I've been called on something? Or no, that is actually really dumb. And so then I leave that one to the side and it doesn't survive the process into writing it out in my own notes. So this isn't probably helpful because this is just me. I almost use my emotions like a compass, trying to work out what's a good note. It's not an intellectual answer. It's pure emotion, but that's how I do it. And another example though is Paddy, you gave an excellent note on the Cypress manuscript. It's a note you've given a couple of times that you've asked for more backstory in the start, the planning in Hobart Town. And I've always resisted it every time I've received that note because I'm like, but I need to keep the front pacey. I don't have enough time for that backstory.
It's permission to have that long fantasy style exposition at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, apparently it takes 5 people to make an argument. I finally had one other person give the exact same note. And I
think resisting that instinct is a good
and I'm like, I've been fighting this note for so long. Finally, enough people have said it. I'm going to bend to it. I'm going to add some more. So your instincts were correct, Paddy. Mine were wrong. I'm going to do it. So again, it's giving your work widely. So even if you are rejecting a note for so long, maybe if 5 different people from 5 different genres and viewpoints are saying the same thing, at some point you have to be like, okay, maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah, if you could get your hand on a writer's, or get your hand on, if you could get into a writer's group, like we've said before, that's excellent for that because it doesn't cost you anything and you can get in and get a range of feedback and you could see kind of what points are repeating. And that's usually a good indicator. If you are going with an editor and paying them, it can be expensive. So you don't want to like, not everyone, very few people can send it to like 4 editors and stuff because that would be very expensive. But like, if you are working with one editor, and they seem to have a pretty good finger on the pulse of your story, and like a lot of their notes feel like they land for you. They're like, okay, yeah, like you see what they're going for and all that stuff. Then if they give you a note that feels confusing to you and it doesn't quite land, but they've had a record of being pretty in step with you, then you can take that note that feels confusing and it's kind of a matter of like, well, they got it wrong. And then you have to decide, it's like, well, what does that tell you that they got it wrong? Chances are it's pretty confusing and you need to revisit it anyway because they've been in step this whole time and suddenly got thrown here. So maybe there's something worth addressing. If they haven't been in step with you the whole time and they're giving you notes all over the place, then they may have just missed the entire like theme of your story or missed something fundamental. It'd be worth checking with someone else to see if that happens again, or if that particular editor just kind of missed how your work works.
Yeah, it's the note behind the
really...
note. Sorry, Matan, I'll throw it to you in a second, but just exactly on what Phoenix is saying is sometimes you'll get a note and you may not apply exactly what they're saying, but if you can identify, well, how did they reach that? You reverse engineer it and you're like, oh, they've been thrown because of this. Yeah. And so it's just tracing their logic back. Yeah, I always think of it, it's the note behind the note. And if you can get a skill for working that out, that's quite invaluable.
Ideally, the editor, if they're a good editor, I feel will also be able to identify that they are probably thrown in a spot. They'll give, like, I know when I'm there, I'll give my point of confusion, but also acknowledge it as like, I feel this wasn't what you intended. I don't know where you're going here. Maybe you're doing this, and I'll give them a few thoughts of where I think they might be going so that I could kind of give them a spread shot to kind of see, so they have kind of a diagnostic.
Nice.
Something
that's good
that I find quite useful. I kind of want to open up to you because I'm not sure if you think it's the same thing. I really like getting the note, and it almost sounds counterintuitive. I like getting the feedback that someone didn't like something or they felt a certain way about it, but they can't explain why, or they can't really identify what it was about it. I always pay more attention to that note than to people who are kind of like, well, this happened and it's because of this and the other. I think there's something about that piece of feedback which is very valuable, because if you're sending your stuff out to writers, the writers are often giving you credit for like maybe what you're trying to do or what you're attempting to accomplish. But someone who like isn't a writer, they can't really articulate it, but they can definitely articulate how what you're writing made them feel. And as storytellers, I think it's really valuable to get an insight into how did this part of the story make someone respond to it? Because you might be trying to do a whole bunch of things behind the scenes, and you can turn around and be like, oh, well, look, they didn't get it, or they didn't connect with what I'm trying to do. But on the surface, like, this is the effect it had on someone who wrote it or someone who read it. So it's often quite good to, I personally always try to like pay a little bit of extra attention to that feedback in particular. Like, but I don't know, do you guys think that's something to watch for, or something that you think? Okay.
Yeah. No, definitely. But that's the kind of feedback that requires 1, patience, and 2, effort. Because it's easy to say, okay, they didn't explain themselves, so I don't have anything to do with this. But actually, like you said, if we can just read their feelings, because at the end of the day, we're not just writing for fellow writers, we're writing for readers. And readers haven't thought about plot and narrative. They just know how a scene made them feel. So I definitely agree with your point.
Yeah, to double down on what Ali and James said, and Matan has followed up on, I think it's about identifying the symptom rather than necessarily the cure. Because a lot of the times, even good writers will say, well, this didn't feel right, maybe try this instead. And you can look at that and go, well, look, that's not actually lining up with this other thing that's going on. Yeah. But you have picked out an operative point where it's like, hey, something is amiss here. So I think that's,
just in a sentence, really, because you guys have given pretty much the entire spectrum of good advice on this. Just I would say be wary of feedback that doesn't advise you on how to write, but advise you on what to write. That's the kind of feedback I'd be careful with. Maybe their advice is terrific, but that's their book, that's their story. Maybe it would be a bestseller. But I don't think most writers, you don't want to just someone tell you what to write, what scene to write. And a lot of people do that, by the way. Oh, what if you write it, but this happens instead? Well, thanks, but you know.
Yeah. And if they're mean to you, ignore it.
Yeah.
There's no room for being mean.
Yep. I thought you were going to say something way worse than ignore it, Phoenix.
Oh, I mean,
that was very
use someone else.
Yeah, that was very mild.
I think in the episode we did discuss this. I've brought up my anecdote about how my advice would be to keep an eye out for if the feedback you're receiving is ego driven, or if there's an alternate reason you're receiving the feedback that's not just to improve the story in front of both of you. I've only found this in Screen. I haven't had this experience in Book World. Book World usually always seems in service of the manuscript, unless someone giving feedback isn't quite aware why they're giving feedback. But yes, if it's ego-based and if they're tearing down your work, it might be rooted in something else and not your work. So always, humans are humans, so keep an eye out for that. All right, next question from Fiona. I recently read a book that went into loads of detail about the main character's past, like whole chapters. But when I finished the book, it turned out to be irrelevant. It didn't have anything to do with what was happening, the character's journey, or how the story ended. It just seemed pointless. My question is, as writers, how do you know how much backstory is too much?
Oh, that's like Jon being the son of Rhaegar in Game of Thrones, right? It's completely irrelevant to the plot. Okay. Sorry,
well, in the show, I imagine
in the show. Yeah, sorry.
The show didn't know what to do with
shot.
that information.
Yeah, I had to put it out there. Sorry, go ahead. Serious answers.
I'm experiencing this right now with my manuscript sovereignty, which is my white whale at the moment. I think for me, at least, the short answer is you can't. I mean, maybe eventually once you're really, really, like your writer's instincts are really honed and you know exactly what should go in, then you'll know. But to an extent, when you're starting, you won't. And I think that's okay, because that's what editing is for. If you overwrite on your first manuscript, those extra words aren't wasted, and you're not obliged to put them in the story. Maybe you're writing that stuff to formalize your own thoughts about that character. Maybe you're writing that stuff because, like, that's what you enjoy writing in that moment, which is a great reason to write something, because you enjoy it, and anything that makes you write more is positive. So if you write that stuff, I mean, it sounds like the caller. I wanted to say the caller. It sounds like the person with this question. Like, they know it's extraneous. So what's the problem? Write it and know it's extraneous, and then later on you'll find a home for it in the story, or you won't. But it's not wasted words if you're writing.
That's such a wonderful overriders answer. I feel like all the overriders 100% agree.
I'm enabling her.
Is there an underwriter in the room?
Well, there is. Apparently,
I definitely lean towards the underwriter.
Yeah, me too.
Underwriter.
Will the real underwriter please stand up?
My attitude personally, and I love more backstory for the main character. Like, I love if an interesting character. I want the full explanation of how they came to be the person that they are. But when I'm writing backstory myself, I always try to ask, is it informing what's happening in the present story? Is it changing what's happening in the present story? Or is it recontextualizing what's happening in the present story? And I feel like if it isn't doing one of those three things, then it's just me indulging in, like, look how cool this character is, or look how cool this world is. And it's not really adding to the narrative of the story that's being told. Like, you might want to have a backstory scene that shows how well-rounded and well-developed and well-written and well-conceptualized your character is. But if it doesn't serve anything in, like, what's going on, then there's no reason to do it, in my opinion. But that's how I approach it.
Yeah,
gotta be tight.
If it's serving the story, it should either be serving the story or the character, and the character should always be serving the story. So really, it should just be serving the story. By all means, write all the things you need to write. But for me, I like to feel like the audience is begging for backstory. You know, like you just give them just enough. Like, you know, I really famously, like, starting in media res and just going through there and being like, who the fuck is this person? And then like, and then finally when they're like, what do you know? Then maybe drop some backstory in there. But I'm very, very, very mealy mouthed with the background.
Do you accommodate the pleas of the reader, Alex, or do you let them like squirm?
I mean, eventually I accommodate them, but I definitely let them squirm for a little bit. You know,
you leave them thirsting for backstory.
Yeah, that's right. I leave them
without reaching the sweet oasis of flashbacks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. Write as much as you want. Don't put too much in. You know, like, yeah.
Yeah, my only guess as to why that book survived being published was they were potentially an underwriter and they just needed to fill out the workout. Like sometimes it happens.
Oh, yeah, that's so
I've spoken to writers who they write a 40K draft and then they're like, oh no, I need to go invent stuff. And I'm like, how does your brain work?
I cannot relate to that at all. That sounds so foreign to me.
Lucky bastards.
But that's the worst if you're like someone who underwrites and then you have to pad it out. Like, no,
I can't think of anything worse.
It was a slim, svelte little volume. It was a novella, and you went and like put all this shit onto it.
It's true.
It's like just.
Sometimes you could pad, but other times it's like, but the story's over. Like, the story's over, so it can't be more. Yeah.
Yeah, don't pad. Never pad.
All right. Another question from Inbar. How can you tell when a story needs another draft and when it's done? Oh gosh.
Always. It always needs another draft.
It always needs another. There will never be
another draft. Don't listen to them.
When is the painting finished?
It's never done.
Infinite drafts.
Yeah.
How long is
Unfortunately, I agree. Genuinely, when it's done
infinite.
is when it's published or it's been filmed.
Mm-hmm. And even then,
when you die,
and even then, you can still work all right. This is the
continue
answer.
from the grave.
To put this into perspective, Tolkien continued to fiddle with his work long after Lord of the Rings was published. That publishing doesn't even stop some authors. Yeah, he does. He revises certain things. He goes back and like people joke about him going in and like moving commas around and stuff, and just like he adds elaboration. He publishing
did he release
doesn't
that
mean...
as like later editions. Like
I think he did do revisional publications and stuff. Yeah, so it never ends. Not unless
you close it from your cold dead hands.
I have a serious answer, if I may. Now that I let out
mine was serious.
Infinite draft.
What do you say?
No, yours was serious. My blabbering about infinite drafts, that was not serious. When is it ready? When people read it, I think, and the reaction is close to what you want or exactly what you want. Don't be the judge of the state of your manuscript by yourself, especially if you know that you, like me and some others in this chat, in this video, in this room, what is this? We tend to lean towards redrafting because we don't trust the Matan from 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. We trust the current Matan. He knows best. Matan from 2 years ago is an idiot. So in that case, get someone else to read it. But be advised, people can read it for the first time only once. So there's a balance here. You don't want to just overdraft it into oblivion, but once you've let someone read it and you've asked them to read it again, and if they're angels upon this cursed world, they will read it again. But that impression is gone. It's going to sound awful. They're used to you as beta readers is greatly diminished.
And if you get an external editor, like you hire a professional editor and you trust their judgment, once you take it to them and they indicate all the things they're going to indicate, that's probably a good sign that, yeah, this is done. Once the editor's been through and they've touched all the things they need touching, then if they're doing their job, you're good.
Yeah, and all the projects that are in my bottom drawer are not in my bottom drawer because I think they're done. I got them to a certain place and then I got busy with other things. And I do plan on coming back to all of them when I have the chance. I don't believe a single one of them are done. And as I really like what Matan said about not trusting the you from 3 weeks ago to 2 years ago, because all those projects in my bottom drawer may as well have been written by someone else at this point. So I am excited by the creative process of dusting them off and seeing what current Ali can do to them, and constantly trying to make them as good as possible. This might be the Slytherin in me talking, but I may as well share it. But I've talked to some writers who they talk about finishing a project and maybe they shop it around. No publishers grabbed it at that time, so they've put it down and they're like, oh, but it's done. I'm never going to revisit it. And I'm like, really? You're never going to revisit it? I'm just, part of me is like, quitter. But then part of me is also like, if you loved it, if there's still a seed of something in there, like I can understand you falling out of love with the project. There's no longer a seed in there that makes you want to come back to it. But all my projects have something that can be found in there that maybe the draft sitting in my bottom drawer, I had done a poor job of trying to unearth the thing that actually interests me. So coming back to it later, I might do a better job, a new structure, some other way of identifying the thing that actually I care about.
I will add an addendum to that, to what you said there, and say kind of the opposite. And I think there are some manuscripts. I wrote one recently that I just looked back at it a couple months later and was just like, yeah, there are some cool things in here, but like this isn't in its current state. This is not a fully fleshed story. It doesn't work. There's a wonky middle bit there. Could I go and fix it? I could. Is it worth doing that too? Maybe not. You know, like I would consider cannibalizing certain parts of it, but like I think sometimes the juice is just not necessarily worth a squeeze, and that energy might be directed to something that you will write better the whole way through. I mean, that is a personal taste thing. Like I tend to like the new shiny thing. So that's a me thing, but I definitely think there are some certain works that you're just like, I just don't think we're gonna bring you to market, buddy. I'm sorry. And that can, you can maybe do something with that, but yeah. So that's what I.
You see, Alex, can I share a real short parable to like demonstrate the difference?
Please do.
If both of us had an injured horse, I feel like I would build a wooden leg for my injured horse. I would nurture my injured horse. I would feed him delicious oatmeal. I think we all know what you would do with your injured horse.
Straight to the glue factory. No questions asked.
No, my horse is going to be a deranged Frankenstein's horse, slow and useless. But I'm going to love that horse.
Yeah, that's
You're going to be riding your Ferrari, yeah? But okay.
That is fair. It's like I feel like this is the definition of kill your darling, you know? Like just being like, hey, maybe this one didn't work out, you know? Like, and I feel that is a singular strength of mine. But
or maybe it's just a small limp and he'll recover if you give him some time.
He will race again.
Yeah. You know,
he'll never
maybe he's not going to win.
People are promoting like rehabilitation, and Alex is like, nah, he's gone.
I would like to stress very clearly that this applies to manuscripts and not horses. I'd like to make that definition very, very clear.
Nobody needs
a metaphor.
Nobody needs a horse with a scratch above their ear. You're useless to me.
And look, honestly, most works I feel can be rehabilitated, but there are a few that you just like, you know, and I'm willing to cut that at some.
All right. The next question along similar lines is from Jose. What is the process from when you finish the story to when it's in good shape to publish it? So for me, I feel like this question's maybe talking more about the nuts and bolts of what you do, and getting it to that publishing stage.
I'm sorry, to self-publish or send it to publishers, because that's a big difference. If you're self-publishing, get a proofreader, a professional proofreader, and probably a professional editor too. If you're sending it to publishers, well, what do you guys think? You don't need a proofreader, right?
Not a proofreader.
Wouldn't have thought so. If you can, great. Like the better shape it is before it goes to the publisher, the better. But it's probably not strictly necessary.
If a publisher loves your work, they will forgive the errant comma and errant spelling mistake because they know that they can fix it. But what they will struggle with is if the structure, big plot things, like they might be able to see the golden goose behind an incorrect structure a little bit, but they will tell you to go away, solve it yourself. They won't solve that level of development in-house.
I would say either way, you want to go with a developmental editor, even if you're self-publishing or whatever, because that's going to be the person that jumps into your story with you and really tries to help you land all your beats and make sure the story as a whole is like communicating what you want to communicate and is doing what you want it to do. And then if you're submitting to publishers, it's going to do the same thing of like, your story is going to be solid to then catch someone's eye. And then, you don't need to fix all the commas and stuff.
We can talk a little bit about what we did at Precipice, since I guess ours is a unique hybrid in that technically self-published, but we had a lot of people to lean on. We did each other's editorial, several rounds of notes, which was excellent. The more I look back on that, I'm actually genuinely excited to go through that gauntlet again. Bring it on. So where we were each other's developmental, structural, but then all the while we're also catching small line edits. But once we declared, it's done, we then divvied up. It's now in proofreading stage among ourselves. We always sent it. So we weren't proofreading our own work. We were proofreading each other's work. Much easier that way. Even then, we have a version 2. We did a second print run. On my bookshelf, I have, they're the V1s, they're the V2s, where we've caught just 1 or 2 mistakes.
That was also for the sticker, no? That was also for the sticker.
Yeah, the sticker.
Yeah. The nomination sticker, not just grammar mistakes.
But look, even the professional publications, it happens. You're never going to catch them all. But I think we've already said it this podcast, but the publishers are only going to read it once. So when you're considering how to get your story in good shape, just ask yourself, because a lot of people start shipping it out to publishers when they're sick of their story. Like they're like, I'm done working on this for now, so I'm going to start shopping it around, which is not necessarily the same thing as it's as good as it can be. So that would be the question I'd just say, ask yourself.
Can I just offer a process? Like if someone really wants the structured steps, step 1, get a bunch of beta readers that you trust, get the feedback back, do what you can by yourself. Step 2, developmental edit. I guess that would be the next natural step, like someone to look at it big picture. Don't get someone to do line edits before you get someone to look at the big picture. Because line edit is, is the zoom in. What's the point of polishing a page to perfection if the big picture is like, we don't need that scene. Don't waste your money, don't waste your time. After you've done big picture, if you're going to self-publish, absolutely get line edits done. Like even a fantastic writer, you miss stuff, okay? It's not about your quality as a writer. You just need a second pair of eyes. If you are going for traditional publishing, then maybe that's the end of the road. No need for proofreading. That's up to you, I guess.
Also, some editors might distinguish between, I know I do this, I distinguish between line editing and copy editing, where I do line editing after developmental editing, and that's looking at sentence structure, phrasing, clarity, and it's going to do more line by line restructuring and rewriting, but it's a bit beefier. And then copy editing is like, I'm just going to go in and scrub your punctuation and grammar and make sure that's in line with a set style guide, and then / help you develop your style guide. And then proofreading is basically copy editing, but it's just someone's already gone in and done the heavy lifting and you're going in and spot checking. And that's that.
All right. We're pretty much halfway with the questions. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We've got a lot of questions, so we're going to be doing this as 2 episodes, which is really exciting. So that brings us to the end of our first episode. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. Please come back when we drop the next episode. More questions from all of you. Most importantly, if you haven't grabbed the audiobook yet, please grab the audiobook. It is available on Audible, Apple, Google, all the places you can get your audiobooks. It is amazing. A year in the making, some incredible artists and some incredible words.
And what's the name of that audiobook, Ali?
It is called The New Mythic, a sci-fi and fantasy collection. Just search that and you'll be able to find it.
And if you like the podcast, rate and give us a review.
Like and subscribe.
We love reviews.
Like and subscribe.
And send in more questions. Let's make this a part 3.
Yeah, send in more.
Keep going.
Yeah.
All right.
And we're fading. We're fading.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, a Precipice Fiction podcast.